The scent of dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. A familiar smell of ancient paper and forgotten stories. That's what hit me first, not the chill of the unheated attic. It was late autumn, the kind of day where the sky felt bruised and low, threatening in early winter. I was up there, a ladder propped precariously against a stack of crates, searching for a long-lost photo album from my childhood. A simple task, a nostalgic diversion from the quiet hum of an empty house. My wife, Alara, was at her gallery opening, the one she'd been working on for months. A triumph, she'd called it in a text earlier, adding a string of celebratory emojis. My own triumph, it seemed, was wrestling with memories in a dusty purgatory. My hand brushed against a small, ornate wooden box tucked behind a roll of discarded carpet. It wasn't mine, nor was it Alara's. Not something I recognized from our shared life. Curiosity, a dangerous impulse, took hold. It was just a small, insignificant box, no bigger than a paperback novel, made of dark, polished wood, cool to the touch. No lock, no clasp, just a lid that lifted with surprising ease. Inside, nested on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, solitary key. Not a house key, not a car key, but an old-fashioned skeleton key, a relic perhaps from a forgotten piece of furniture. It felt weighty, colder than it looked, an unexpected anchor in the ephemeral dust. Next to the key, a folded slip of paper. Old, crinkled at the edges, like it had been handled countless times. I unfolded it, my fingers tracing the faint, almost faded ink. A single word, elegant and precise, written in a hand I didn't recognize, Viridian. No address, no date, just that one word. Viridian. It echoed in the silent attic, a foreign sound in the familiar quiet of our home. My mind, usually a neatly ordered filing cabinet of facts and figures, began to whir, trying to categorize this anomaly. Alara had always been meticulous about her belongings, open about her past. We shared everything, or so I believed. This box, this key, this word, they were outliers. I tucked the key and the paper back into the box, then placed the box carefully into my pocket. The search for the photo album forgotten, replaced by a nascent unease. Alara wouldn't be home until well past midnight. Her openings were always late affairs, followed by drinks with her gallery partners. Plenty of time to ponder. I descended the ladder, the dust settling around me like a fine, unwelcome snow. My architectural practice, meticulous and demanding, had taught me to trust my instincts, to spot the minute flaw in a blueprint, the subtle shift in a foundation. And something in the foundation of my understanding of Alara had just shifted. I moved to my study, the sleek, minimalist space, a stark contrast to the cluttered attic. My laptop sat open, a half-finished structural analysis on the screen. I closed it, the sudden blankness of the display mirroring the sudden blankness in my mind. Viridian. It sounded like a place, or perhaps a person, or maybe even a coded message. I started with a simple online search, typing the word into the search bar. The results were a dizzying array of botanical terms, shades of green, even a fictional character from a fantasy novel. Nothing tangible, nothing that resonated with the cold weight of the key in my pocket. My gaze drifted to the framed photograph on my desk, Alara and me, taken on our honeymoon in Santorini. Her laugh, bright and unrestrained, her arm linked through mine, the endless blue of the Aegean behind us. We had built so much together. Our home, my practice, her gallery. 5 years of marriage, a decade together before that. A partnership founded on shared dreams and mutual respect. Or so I thought. The key in my pocket felt like a stone, heavy and unyielding. It wasn't anger that stirred within me, not yet. It was a cold, precise confusion, a design flaw in a structure I believed was perfect. The first crack in the facade. The hours crawled by. The scent of Alara's favorite lavender candle, which she always lit before leaving, seemed to mock the growing chill in the house. I tried to immerse myself in work, but the numbers on my screen blurred, replaced by the looping image of that small wooden box, the skeleton key, and the word Viridian. My mind, trained to identify patterns and anomalies, was now fixated on this single, unsettling detail. I knew Alara's family history, her childhood in a small coastal town, her aspirations for her gallery. Or so I thought. We had often joked about having no secrets, about our lives being open books to each other. The key felt like a bookmark tucked into a page I'd never seen before. Around 2 in the morning, I heard her car pull into the driveway. The familiar click of the front door, the soft murmur of her humming as she moved through the hall. I remained in my study, the laptop closed, the room dim. She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Still up, love?" she asked, her voice a little slurred, bright with wine and success. "Just finishing up a few things," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She came in, smelling of expensive perfume and celebratory champagne, leaning down to kiss my forehead. The opening was incredible. "You should have come. Everyone loved the new series." I murmured something non-committal, and she yawned, stretching. "Well, I'm exhausted. Big day tomorrow. Don't stay up too late." She left, and I heard her soft footsteps retreat down the hall, then the gentle click of our bedroom door. The next morning, a Saturday, was usually our ritual of lazy breakfast and share plans. Today, it felt different. Alara was bright-eyed, buzzing from the success of her opening. She chattered about sales, about reviews, about future exhibitions. I listened, nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, constructing scenarios, discarding them, try to find a logical explanation for the key. Was an antique, a prop for some art project? But the note, Viridian, it felt too personal, too pointed. Later that day, while Alara was out running errands for the gallery, I went back to the attic. This time, I was more methodical, less driven by vague nostalgia. I found a faint outline where the box had rested. My fingers traced the wood, felt the rough grain of the floorboards beneath. And then, almost imperceptibly, I noticed it. A slight indentation, barely visible, on the wall behind where the box had been. Not a scratch, but a faint, circular mark, as if something had been pressed against it repeatedly. It was too small to be significant on its own, but combined with the key, it became another thread in a burgeoning tapestry of doubt. I ran my hand over the wall, exploring the texture. It was a false wall, I realized, or at least a section of it. The plaster felt slightly different, a subtle shift in temperature and density. My training as an architect wasn't just about designing new structures, but understanding the old ones, finding the hidden conduits, the forgotten spaces. This felt like one of them. With a utility knife from my toolbox, I carefully, painstakingly began to cut along the edge of what I suspected was a panel. The attic was filled with the soft, rasping sound of the blade, a counterpoint to the thumping of my own heart. What I uncovered wasn't dramatic, no hidden vault or secret passage. It was a small, shallow cavity, just deep enough to hold a few slender objects. And there they were, a handful of old, worn letters tied with a faded ribbon, and a small, leather-bound journal. They looked as if they had been placed there with intention, protected from the dust and the light. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for them. The letters were addressed to Alara, but the return address was a post office box in a town I didn't recognize, miles from her childhood home. The postmarks were old, predating our relationship. But the journal, that was the chilling part. It was newer, its binding less cracked, its pages less yellowed. And on the first page, written in that same elegant hand from the slip of paper, was the single, chilling word, Viridian. I retreated to my study, the journal clutched in my hand, its weight feeling immense, like a lead brick. The letters lay beside it, untouched for now. My fingers traced the faded leather cover, the title Viridian seeming to pulsate with an unseen energy. I opened it, the pages rustling softly like dry leaves. The handwriting was neat, flowing, unmistakably Alara's. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a historical artifact or a casual note. This was her. This was something she had deliberately hidden. The first entry was dated almost 15 years ago, long before we'd even met. It spoke of a difficult childhood, a stifling small town, and a deep longing for escape. Nothing particularly shocking yet, though it painted a picture of a younger Alara I hadn't known. But as I turned the pages, the entries grew more specific, more vivid. They detailed a relationship, intense and passionate, with a man named Silas, a fellow artist as it turned out. He was older, charismatic, and volatile. He filled her world with color and chaos, pushing her artistic boundaries, but also, it became clear, eroding her sense of self. The entries revealed a desperate pursuit of validation, a hunger for his approval that bordered on obsession. She chronicled their shared dreams of opening a gallery, a place called Viridian. My breath hitched. It was a name, yes, but also a concept, a shared aspiration. The key, I realized, was for a theoretical space, a symbolic lock on a dream. The journal then detailed a gradual unraveling. Arguments, betrayals, financial struggles, and a slow, painful realization that Silas was using her, both emotionally and creatively. He took credit for her ideas, sold her pieces as his own, and eventually, after a particularly vicious fight, disappeared, leaving her in debt and heartbroken. A chilling entry described her utter devastation, her vow to never let anyone control her again, to build her own legacy. And then, a jarring leap in time. The next entry was dated a year before we met. It spoke of a cautious return to art, a new determination, and a new strategy. She wrote about building a life of stability, of finding a partner who would provide the framework for her success, a foundation she could build upon without fear of betrayal. A safe harbor, she called it. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A safe harbor. Was that what I was? A means to an end? The entries continued, detailing her meticulous planning for her own gallery, her ambitions, her desire for financial independence. There was a cold, pragmatic thread running through these later entries. She spoke of appearances, of presenting a certain image, of cultivating connections. And then there it was, an entry dated just weeks before we started dating. She had just secured a small loan, enough to start scouting locations for her first gallery space. My own Viridian, she wrote, built on my terms. No more shared dreams, just my own. The name on the paper, the name of her current gallery, was not Viridian. It was Aura, a beautiful, ephemeral name, completely devoid of the brutal honesty of her true ambition. I closed the journal, the smell of old paper and ink suddenly cloying. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and confusing, were now fitting together with a horrifying precision. My analytical mind, usually my greatest asset, had become my tormentor, laying bare the truth with stark, undeniable clarity. It wasn't just a hidden past, it was a hidden motive. The confusion I'd felt in the attic had solidified into a cold, hard lump in my chest. It wasn't a crack in the foundation. It was a carefully constructed void. The following days were a blur of forced normalcy. Alara, oblivious, continued to revel in her gallery success. She spoke of expansion, of new artists, of a solo exhibition in New York she hoped to secure. Each mention of her grand plans, each radiant smile, felt like a fresh wound. I observed her no longer as my wife, but as a complex design, a facade I was now meticulously deconstructing. I saw the calculated charm, the subtle manipulations, the way she steered conversations to her own advantage. It wasn't overt malice, but a deeply ingrained pragmatism that now chilled me to the bone. I spent hours in my study, the journal hidden away, but its contents etched into my mind. I reviewed our financial history with a forensic eye, something I'd always done for clients, but never for us. The patterns emerged, clear and unsettling. My initial capital for her gallery, the steady flow of funds from our joint accounts, the generous allowances for her artistic endeavors. All of it meticulously channeled, building her empire, while I, the safe harbor, provided the stable foundation. It wasn't theft in the conventional sense, no large, unauthorized transfers. It was a slow, deliberate siphoning, masked by the legitimate expenses of a burgeoning business and the implicit trust of a marriage. The tension in the house became a palpable thing, a silent hum beneath the surface of our polite conversations. I found myself choosing my words with extreme care, testing their resonance, watching her reactions. She sensed something, I think. A subtle shift in my demeanor, a colder note in my voice when I asked about her plans. But she dismissed it, attributing it to my usual reserved nature, my preoccupation with my own work. That's what I was to her. After all, the dependable, slightly detached architect. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, the expensive wine she'd chosen shimmering in our glasses, I decided to test the waters. I was in the attic the other day. I began, my voice even, looking for some old photos. Found a few things I didn't recognize. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, usually so expressive, narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Oh," she asked, her tone light, but with an underlying edge. "Like what?" "A small wooden box," I said, watching her intently, "with an old key inside, and a note. Just a single word." I paused, letting the silence stretch, thick with unspoken implications. "Viridian." The color drained from her face. Her hand, holding the fork, trembled slightly, and a faint flush rose on her neck. It was a fleeting moment, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Viridian? Oh, that old thing," she laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "It was just a silly name for an art project I had years ago. Something I dreamed up with an old acquaintance. Never really went anywhere." She waved a dismissive hand, attempting to brush it off as trivial. "An old acquaintance named Silas?" I continued, my voice still calm, but the name hung in the air like a pronouncement. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and guarded. The feigned nonchalance vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear, quickly followed by a hardened resolve. "What are you talking about, Julian?" she asked, her voice tight, no longer light. "Why are you digging into my past? What is this, an interrogation?" "It's not an interrogation, Elara," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's a realization. A quiet unfolding. I found your journal, too. The one detailing your safe harbor strategy." The air crackled. She pushed her chair back, a harsh scrape against the floor. Her face was pale, devoid of all its usual vibrant confidence. The elegant mask had shattered. "You went through my private things?" she whispered, her voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How dare you? How dare I?" I echoed, a low, controlled anger finally surfacing. "How dare you, Elara? How dare you build a life on a foundation of calculated deceit? How dare you reduce our marriage, our shared future, to a financial strategy? You didn't just hide a past. You orchestrated a future at my expense." Her anger flared, a defensive fire. "You don't understand anything. You were always so distant, so wrapped up in your numbers and your blueprints. I needed more. I needed someone to believe in my dreams, to support me without question." "I did support you, Elara," I said, my voice rising slightly, "with everything I had. My time, my trust, my capital. You took it all, not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. And you call me a safe harbor in your journal, a place to weather the storms until you were strong enough to sail away on your own." The words were out, stark and unvarnished, severing the last fragile threads of our shared illusion. The confrontation wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Alara's face was a mask of disbelief, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, a chilling stillness settled over her. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "Are you going to try and ruin me? Take the gallery? Is that what this is about? Revenge?" "No," I replied, my voice steady, though a tremor ran through me. "It's about truth. And justice, yes. But not destruction for its own sake. I want what's fair, what's right, what was promised, even if it was a promise made under false pretenses." The anger was still there, a low burn, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of exhaustion. The energy it took to maintain the illusion, to perform this silent dance of deception, had drained me. The fallout was swift and brutal. I engaged legal counsel, a sharp, dispassionate woman who understood the intricacies of financial contributions within a marriage, especially when one party had a detailed, written record of their intentions. Alara initially tried to fight, hiring a high-profile attorney who painted me as a controlling, jealous husband trying to undermine his wife's success. But her attorney quickly realized the depth of the evidence. The journal entries, the financial records, the documented timeline of her Viridian dream versus our shared life. It was an undeniable narrative of calculated intent. The whispers started amongst our mutual friends, then turned into hushed conversations. Some took Alara's side, believing her narrative of a cruel husband. Others, those who knew my quiet integrity, began to question. The art world, always a hotbed of gossip, churned with speculation. Alara's triumphant gallery opening was quickly eclipsed by the swirling rumors of a contentious divorce. She saw the looks, the sidelong glances, the uncomfortable silence when she entered a room. The carefully cultivated image of the driven, visionary artist began to fray at the edges. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a stark, temporary space. The minimalist aesthetic I once shared with Alara now felt cold, empty. I found myself seeking solace in the familiar rhythm of my work, the clear logic of blueprints and structural integrity. My clients, thankfully, were insulated from the personal turmoil. They valued my precision, my ability to build sound, lasting structures. Irony, I thought that I could build perfect buildings, but had failed to see the rot in my own foundation. One afternoon, I received a call from Alara's attorney, a settlement proposal. It was surprisingly reasonable, a testament to the undeniable evidence I possessed. The gallery would remain hers, her primary asset, and she would take on the associated debts. I would retain my practice and our investment properties, which I had largely managed independently. There would be no alimony. The agreement also stipulated a return of all personal items, something I hadn't explicitly asked for, but which pleased me. A small victory for the intangible, the things money couldn't quantify. It was not a complete financial devastation for her, as I had the power to inflict. It was a clear, equitable division, exposing her machinations but allowing her to keep her core ambition, albeit stripped of its fraudulent underpinnings. The quiet ache of betrayal lingered, but it no longer consumed me. The anger had receded, replaced by a sense of profound clarity. I didn't feel victorious, not in a celebratory way, more like a surgeon who had successfully removed a malignant growth. The operation was over, the recovery would be long, but the disease was gone. I looked out the window of my new apartment, the city lights beginning to flicker on. The landscape felt different now, sharper, more defined. I could see the underlying structures, the hidden systems, the patterns of movement. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly seeing. The divorce was finalized quietly, without fanfare. The legal documents, once thick with accusations and counterarguments, were now just a thin stack of papers, signed and sealed. The official end of a decade-long relationship, reduced to bureaucratic formality. I felt no elation, no profound sadness, just a quiet sense of finality, like the last brick being laid on a long-finished wall. The apartment, initially a temporary refuge, slowly began to feel like home. I bought new furniture, pieces that reflected my own taste, uninfluenced by anyone else's aesthetic. The walls remained largely bare, a canvas awaiting new stories. I heard snippets about Alara through the grapevine. Her gallery, Aura, was still operating, though the buzz had diminished. She'd managed to secure a few new artists, but the grand New York exhibition she'd once dreamed of seemed to have evaporated. The art world, unforgiving in its memory, had moved on. There was no bitterness in my observation, just a detached understanding of consequences. She was building her Viridian, yes, but on a foundation she had to construct entirely on her own, without the safe harbor she'd once so carefully engineered. My brother, Marcus, visited one weekend. He was a landscape architect, grounded and pragmatic, much like me, but with a more expansive view of the world. We spent Saturday morning at a local lumberyard, picking out wood for a new workbench I planned to build. "Heard Alara's still plugging away," he said, as we loaded planks in his truck. "You know, you could have really gone after her. Made it much harder." I shrugged, adjusting a heavy beam. What would have been the point? The goal wasn't to destroy her, but to free myself, and to ensure she couldn't build her future on someone else's unwitting contribution again. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic clang of hammers and saws from other parts of the yard providing a strange kind of peace. The smell of sawdust was clean, honest. Thinking of taking a sabbatical, I said eventually, wiping sweat from my brow. Maybe a few months. Travel. See some of the architectural wonders I've only ever studied in books. Marcus smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. Dad would have loved that. He always said you needed to look beyond the blueprints, see the world in 3 dimensions. That evening, after Marcus left, I sat on my small balcony, a glass of water in hand. The city hummed around me, a symphony of distant traffic and muted conversations. It was different from the quiet, manicured suburbs I'd shared with Alara. More vibrant, more real. I thought about the attic, the dust, the small wooden box, the key, the word Viridian. It had been the catalyst, the tiny crack that revealed the vast, hidden void. I thought about the years I'd spent, noticing the signs, the subtle discrepancies, but choosing to ignore them, to believe in a narrative I wanted to be true. My own complicity in the illusion. But now, the ledger was balanced. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. I didn't feel like a victim, nor a victor. I felt like an architect who had finally completed a difficult renovation, stripping away the false walls and revealing the true structure. The process had been painful, exposing weaknesses I hadn't wanted to acknowledge in myself. But it had also revealed a resilience, a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The next morning, I called my office and informed them of my extended leave. Then I packed a small bag, grabbed my passport, and hailed a taxi to the airport. No itinerary, no fixed destination, just the open sky and the promise of new horizons. For the first time in years, the only blueprint I was following was my own.